Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger. Welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp LaRouche. It's August 19th, 2020, and we're in a very strange period of time right now, very dangerous. We're in the United States. You have the Democratic Convention underway. Again, strange is probably the wrong term, but an unusual event trying to showcase a party which is basically taken over completely by the war party and the neoliberals. Helga, what's your view of what's happening with this Democratic Convention?
Well, I think that anybody who watches the Democratic Convention will be really scared about what that means for the future in case President Trump would not be re-elected, because what comes out very clearly is that the Democrats and the neocons on the Republican side are not different. They are the same. The war party is on a complete footing against Russia, against China. And, in a certain sense, it's quite obvious, when the daughter of McCain came and praised the incredible friendship between McCain and Biden. Here you have the man becoming having been voted already the presidential candidate of the Democratic Party, who is responsible or who was in charge of the Maidan coup in Ukraine, who was part of the Obama policies of pivot Asia, which laid the ground for the present confrontation against China. Kamala Harris, who has a record of having come out with very aggressive lines against Russia and China. The Republican Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee just produced another 1,000-page report about the so-called Russian interference in the 2016 election, as if the revelations of Bill Binney and other members of the Veterans for Intelligence, for Sanity in Intelligence, had never spoken up about all the lies this was based on. So the picture is really a very eerie one. Michelle Obama made this incredible video, really like a Hollywood actress, attacking Trump for being, completely incompetent, and then saying that he lacks complete empathy. Now, I remember many things of Obama, which lacking empathy is just an understatement of the year. I remember when he went to South Africa and told the Africans that they should not expect to ever have a car, a house, a refrigerator, because if every African would want such a thing, the planet would boil over. I remember the many drones which were sent in the Obama administration, hitting civilian family events. All of these things do not exactly represent empathy. I think this is really an incredible assault on the idea of reason and memory, because these two party leaderships are absolutely one war party. Now, not only do they have a war orientation, but they have an extremely bad taste. And I must admit, I watched this singer, Billy Porter, and I must say, if weirdness needs a prize, I think he has definitely made it. How can you put such a strange thing up as the thing to be celebrated at the end of the first day of the convention? Now, I think this is really bad, and I think they really revealed themselves as the war party. So I think this forebodes not very good for the United States if they would win the election.
On this war party question, you mentioned Cindy McCain, the wife of John McCain, praising the relationship between her husband and Biden. You also had Colin Powell there. Now, this is an unbelievable, would be a gaffe if the Democrats had any conscience, because Powell was the person who presented the lies on Iraq weapons of mass destruction, which cleared the way for a UN Security Council vote to launch the invasion of Iraq. But I think it's important, Helga, if you have more to say on the Senate Intelligence Committee report, because among the people they attacked were Manafort, Roger Stone. It's just filled with the same old lies, and that's what's being recycled through the Democratic Convention.
Yes, I think that the most interesting thing which happened potentially, or which could become one of the most interesting things, is that there are these rumors that Trump supposedly mentioned to his aides, and also in a press interview, the possibility that he is rethinking the possibility to pardon Snowden. Now, obviously, Trump had said very harsh things about Snowden many years ago, and this reflects that he is clearly rethinking what this whole Snowden thing revealed. And that is for sure not without the press conferences Bill Binney did with the Schiller Institute and LaRouche PEC, and what Roger Stone had said on this program, namely, remember what this whole whistleblower thing was all about. Several of them, Edward Snowden, but also Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe and Ray McGovern and others, they basically were parts of the intelligence community. But then they realized all of a sudden that, especially after September 11th, this whole surveillance apparatus took on a life of its own. And that is obviously a complete threat to the Constitution of the United States, to the freedom of every citizen around the world. And so obviously in the whole investigation about Russiagate, the fact that there was no Russian hacking of the DNC computers, that it was Hillary Clinton's campaign hiring Christopher Steele in cahoots with all the heads of intelligence of the Obama administration, working with British intelligence in all of these activities. That is what Trump knows he has been up against for the last 3.5 years. And therefore, if he then, as one part of these reflections, is considering to pardon Snowden, I think this is highly, highly interesting. And one can only hope that he extends this to Assange and puts pressure on Boris Johnson to release Assange from prison, where he's in acute danger of dying, because of the pandemic, but also his health apparently is very, very weakened. So one can only hope that these impulses come to a concrete result very, very soon. I think this would be a benefit for the whole world.
And the whole question of undermining the narrative of Russiagate gets to the other really significant issue before the world, which is the danger of a war between the United States and Russia, or the United States and China. We've seen a number of increasing threats in the last couple of days, beginning with the discussion around the danger of a nuclear war with China. So it's crucial that this come out. What have you picked up in just the last couple of days on this war threat?
Well, it's very worrisome that the same Billingsley, who is otherwise the negotiator in the strategic arms negotiations with Ryabkov in Vienna, this same Billingsley, in an interview with the Japanese media, announced that the United States is planning to put a lot of medium-range missiles in the Western Pacific. Now, these are new weapons which were started to be built after the US left the INF Treaty. And even if these are supposedly non-nuclear missiles, it is part of this whole encirclement policy in the Pacific against China. And obviously, since these missiles have a range of 1,000 kilometers, which basically would probably require more bases on top of the 400 bases already encircling China, from Korea to Japan to Australia to Afghanistan. So this is all a build-up. And if you then look at the ongoing, very provocative military activities in the South China Sea, along the Chinese Sea, the Chinese coast, around Taiwan, it is quite understandable that several people are concerned that the military confrontation between the United States and China is not unthinkable. Some people were even concerned that this may happen before the election. I mean, you can easily create an incident which then Trump would be confronted with, as we have seen it many times in the past. But I think this historian or professor from Chicago, John Mersheimer, just warned that while in the Cold War between NATO and the Soviet Union, the use of nuclear weapons in Europe was extremely unlikely, given the very high density of nuclear weapons there. And if anyone would have been used, it would have probably immediately triggered the launch of the entire arsenal from both sides. So he says this is not the situation in the Western Pacific. So the idea that a nuclear weapon could be used is actually quite thinkable. Now, I mean, I think that is a total danger, that this, if it would come to such a thing, it could get out of control. And if one studies the logic of nuclear war, the likelihood that it could lead to a general nuclear war is absolutely given. So I think that this is a very dangerous situation, and does require a complete change in the attitude, and the fact that you have the Democrats and people in the Trump administration like Pompeo, Esper, Navarro, and so forth, all on this anti-China line, really should be countered, because we need the collaboration between the United States and China on all relevant issues: the economy, the pandemic, the world health situation. So I think this should be really taken serious and should be countered, because we are really looking at the existence of civilization as such.
And in addition to the whole discussion around China, you have again the resurgence of this anti-Russia line, partly from the Senate Intelligence Committee report, but also at the Democratic Convention, people saying the Russians are preparing to intervene again, as though it were proven that they had intervened in 2016. In this context, we see the remarks by the former commander of U.S. forces in Europe, General Hodges, talking about putting U.S. troops in Romania. And we have Pompeo signing an agreement for U.S. troops in Poland. What's the reaction in Europe to this, Helga? Is there any response to this kind of expanding the encirclement in Eastern Europe?
Well, it's very difficult to judge, because below the surface, I think the Europeans are quite freaked out. I think that there are some very high-ranking people who feel that the cancellation of all these arms control treaties, from the ABM treaty, the INF treaty, the Open Sky treaty, and now there's the START treaty, which hangs still by a thread, that all of these things create instability and leave the security interest of Europe completely outside. And then if you take that in addition with the sanctions threatened by the Senate because of the Nord Stream 2, which people really freak out, in terms of that this is a complete violation of the sovereignty and the right of European countries to take care of their own energy needs. So the situation is extremely unstable. Now, unfortunately, the present EU is trying to deal with that by playing their own geopolitical games, which does not help the situation one iota, because, as I have said many times, it was geopolitics which caused two world wars, and I don't think the idea of a European army and the European, own defense conception is really helping the situation. So I think what we have been saying the whole time is that all of these games have the potential for leading to a catastrophe, and we need a new paradigm, a completely different approach, economic cooperation, the LaRouche program, new Bretton Woods, the cooperation with China and Russia on the urgent questions of reconstructing the Middle East, of developing Africa. I mean, there are so many problems which can only be solved if geopolitics is overcome.
Well, and we also see responses from people like Zakharova, the Russian, the spokesman for the foreign ministry, warning about the danger from these kinds of moves into Eastern Europe. As you said, the START treaty is hanging in a balance. I think it expires in February. Trump had a comment the other day about the importance of this. Does any of this register? It seems not to register in the United States. Is it coming across at all in Europe?
Well, I don't know if I cannot speak for all of Europe. I can only say that I personally thought that this remark by Trump, that he regards the a new strategic pact with Russia on nuclear disarmament as the most important question. I think that that is very important. And there are also these rumors that he expressed that he wants to meet Putin before the November election. This was then immediately countered by National Security Advisor O'Brien, who contradicted himself several times by first saying that there's no such plan. Then he said, but we would be happy to receive Putin in Washington. I think that such a meeting between Trump and Putin is extremely important, but hopefully it occurs in the context of a larger P5 meeting as quickly as possible, but no later than September. So I think there are many people who are extremely concerned about the strategic instability, and many, at least in private discussions, agree that the overall situation is more dangerous than at any time since the Cold War, and maybe even since the Cuban Missile Crisis, simply because all these treaties have been canceled. There's no trust between the US and China, US and Russia, Europe and the United States. So I think we have a situation which is pretty close to a chaotic strategic situation, if you ever have seen one.
Now, we're watching fairly closely what's happening in Belarus, where you had an election, it's being contested. Some people are saying this is a potential new Maidan, a new Ukraine. What's your assessment of what's happening in Belarus?
Well, it's very complicated. I think the situation is not exactly the same like in Ukraine, where you had the element of the Bandera networks, which were then instrumentalized by the color revolution sponsors in the West, like Victoria Nuland, who passed out cookies to the Maidan demonstrators, and you had her bragging about using $5 billion for NGOs in Ukraine alone. Now, in Belarus, the situation is more complicated. I mean, first of all, Belarus obviously is part of the Eurasian Economic Union. They are very closely integrated, both economically and militarily, with Russia. Much of the defense of Belarus is integrated with the Russian defense. So that creates already a very clear situation there, where if you do anything in Belarus, you immediately obviously target Russia. I mean, also obviously because of the territorial proximity between Belarus and Moscow. Lukashenko is also a complicated situation because on the one side, he in the 90s did not go with the Jeffrey Sachs kinds of reforms. He kept many of the state firms, not privatizing them. And he had a relatively cushion against the shock therapy, and people did better. But then naturally, with the general economic crisis, which is hitting the entire planet in the aftermath of the COVID crisis, naturally the economic situation got worse. Lukashenko himself did not have the best relationship in the recent period with Putin, because he tried to also, orient it towards Europe, then shifting back to Russia. So it was a back and forth. So I think that there is not the best situation between Lukashenko and Russia at this point. But on the other side, naturally, whenever you have any kind of protest, in this case coming from nationalist forces in Belarus, it is being used immediately by the West to smell color revolution and try to, use the fact that there are also many NGOs and think tanks and whatnot in Belarus. So very good example, Putin just insisted in a phone discussion with Chancellor Merkel that there absolutely must be no outside interference. Now, the EU Council just had a special meeting on the situation in Belarus, and Merkel gave a press conference afterwards where she, after listing all kinds of foreign interventions, like the demand that there must be an immediate unconditional release of all prisoners. I think altogether about 5,000 people were put in jail as part of these riots and demonstrations. So regardless of what they did, to just demand an unconditional release, I mean, if that's not an interference, then she demanded all kinds of democratic reforms and basically talks with the opposition. After she listed all of these things, she said, no, there should be no foreign intervention, after she just had a whole list of doing it. So, I think that this thing is very dangerous because obviously the same forces who would like to have regime change in Russia, in China, they are not missing an opportunity to try to do exactly that. And I think part of the program which this opposition party has is very much in the direction of privatization and just the kind of reforms which the IMF would like to have. So, it is one more crisis spots, and I can only say that the only way how you overcome these things is you have to have a new paradigm, because we are sitting on a complete powder keg in terms of the collapse of the economy, pending financial crash, and everything is really sitting like on a volcano.
And when you mention the financial crash and the economic crash, there are new reports coming out in Germany about the complete demolition of the Mittelstand, the medium and small enterprises.
Yeah, I mean, these figures are quite alarming. I mean, there was just a report that one agency, private agency, estimates that 800,000 SMEs in Germany are in danger to go bankrupt between now and spring 21, and another 500,000 hidden threatening insolvencies. So that would make 1.3 million bankruptcies. That's about a good third of all the German hardcore productive part of the economy going bankrupt. This obviously would mean many people getting unemployed, an incredible collapse of the largest and strongest economy of Europe, and I think this is really bad. And obviously the policies of the ECB, just to put out liquidity in order to keep the banking system afloat without any kind of real investment program in the real economy, does not help it. And I think it quite fitting that the former economic minister of Italy, Giulio Tremonti, just compared what the central banks are doing with the policies of Hjalmar Schacht, and the MEFO bills, which financed the war economy of the Nazis. I think that that comparison is something people should think about, and obviously this cannot go on for very long. And the fact that you do see now inflation coming back, despite all of these promises that no, these liquidity pumpings will have never an impact on inflation, obviously is not true, because food prices, fuel prices, rents, all of this is going up. And, I mean, if the money pumping continues, you will see hyperinflation, even if you have a collapse of the economy. So I think that all cries out for reforms and a real serious reorganization of the global financial system.
And Tremonti's reference to Schacht is especially timely, given that we just passed the 49th anniversary of the August 15, 1971 takedown of the Bretton Woods system, during which your husband warned that Schachtian economic policies are what's going to be brought back with the rejection of the Bretton Woods system. Now, Helga, this question of the new paradigm, this is the topic of the upcoming conference the Schiller Institute is holding on September 5th and September 6th, an online conference. What can you tell us about what's being planned for that?
Well, that conference will be extremely important because, it is one more in a whole series of Schiller conferences, which we started in April 25th and 26th, which was already, a very important conference, because we had high-level participation from many governments, Russia, China, Africans, Europeans. This was continued in May and June, and we just had last Saturday also a very important conference with Latin American, Spanish speaking. It was all in Spanish except my own speech, but it was very successful. We had more than 500 listeners live, and more than 20,000 people watched it afterwards. And the theme always has been the same, and it has been picked up now by many other bloggers and websites, that we need a new paradigm. That if you look at all of the crises, the financial crisis, the economic collapse, the pandemic, the war danger, you cannot solve these problems on a regional level or just take one problem at a time. You need a complete different approach. And as we have been discussing many times, the only way how you can accomplish that is you have to get the leading governments of the world, or at least a good representation of such governments, to make the kinds of sweeping reorganization my husband has been fighting for 50 years of his life. You need a new Bretton Woods system, which gives cheap long-term credit lines for the industrialization of the developing countries, to reindustrialize the United States and Europe, to cooperate with Russia and China in the development of especially Africa, Latin America, Asian countries, to overcome poverty and the present condition which allowed this pandemic to have such raving results, especially in the so-called third world. Now, this must happen soon, and I think the only realistic framework right now on the agenda is what President Putin has been organizing for since January, to have a summit of the permanent 5 countries of the UN Security Council, and this would bring together Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping. and that would be already the most important combination. Then Macron and Boris Johnson, and that is probably the last chance to reorganize the system before it blows out. Because if you go into the election period with all of this talk about these strange two retired colonels who demanded a military coup if Trump refuses to leave the White House, if he loses the election. This was then countered by the Pentagon. Then all of this craziness around that the Democrats are saying that Trump will, Biden himself, basically said that Trump will not accept losing the election. I mean, we are going into a period, of utmost danger, the danger of provocation, military situation getting out of control. So this summit, the P5 summit, must discuss a new paradigm among relations in international relations among nations. It must put on the agenda a new Bretton Woods system which overcomes the poverty in the world, and it has to have a dialogue among these countries, respect for sovereignty, non-interference, ending the endless wars, and giving the world an economic order which allows the prospering of every country on this planet as the only basis for a new security architecture. So these are the big issues which will decide over the existence of civilization, and that is the subject of our upcoming conference. So you should absolutely spread the news about this conference. We already have extremely important speakers participating, and spread the news. Tell your friends in social media that this conference is taking place, and register so that you can participate as an active element in asking questions and participating in the dialogue. I mean, we have to increase the alertness of the world population, both about the complexity of all of these problems hanging together, but also about the need that only a real grand design, a real vision for the future can solve the present dangers in which mankind finds itself. So that is what I'm asking you to do.
And you can register for this at the schillerinstitute.com. It's an online conference, September 5th and 6th. There's no reason anyone would miss this. So sign up now. And Helga, if you have nothing else, I guess we'll see you again next week.
Yes, till next week.
Okay.